Welcome back. In session 3, we are going to talk about forgiving our brothers and the older son. We have focused on the forgiveness granted by the father for the prodigal son. And in our Eucharistic service, we are going to be asking God to forgive our sins. In that service, before communion is distributed, we all say the Lord's Prayer. Right in the heart of the prayer that Christ taught us, that Jesus told us, if you want to pray, this is the way you pray. And right in the heart of that prayer, we ask our Father to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So we can't talk about forgiveness without discussing that aspect of our living with one another. And if we're honest, it can be more difficult to deal with each other than for asking for help when we're in church. We all have events or words in our past that we wish we hadn't said or done. Maybe in our families, maybe at work, maybe at church. In recent years, the topic of forgiveness has become much more open and general than it ever was before. There are whole seminars on it, there are lectures on it, there are shelves of books on it. It's very frequently discussed and written about. I mentioned earlier that one of the most publicized forgiveness processes during our lifetime was in South Africa after the demise of apartheid. Without it, the country would simply have been torn apart. It was led by the Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu and called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think of him now as an apostle for our time, an apostle of forgiveness. And that model, that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has been used in more than 20 other countries besides South Africa. He died, I believe, in 2021 in Cape Town, having written and spoken extensively around the world on forgiveness. We're going to use Archbishop Tutu's 4 steps of forgiveness for our discussion next. The fourfold path of forgiving one another. First is telling the story. Second is naming the hurt. Third is granting forgiveness. And the fourth is renewing or releasing the relationship. I had mentioned that the book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu and his daughter, I think we have several copies in our library here, and it's easily available. Tom got it virtually overnight for us online. Let's talk for a minute about telling the story, because each of those steps is necessary if you're really going to deal with a hurt that has bothered you a lot. And I'm going to start with telling the story, because Desmond Tutu felt this was essential. It's for you, the person who has been hurt, the victim. It's also for the person that you're asking. It's the other side, it's both sides. Telling the story, why do I have to do that? Why can't I just forget this whole deal? It's too painful. Let's take a simple case of Well, we could do an extraordinary one. Maybe the extraordinary is easier. Suppose we were talking about a child who has been sexually molested. Heaven knows we've got enough examples of that in the newspaper now. All right, the newspaper or the criminal charge can to some extent tell the story. But you need to know, forget all the requirements of the law. You need to know who was involved and who's the victim and how old were they. You need to know the story. And how did you, the mother or the aunt or whoever, find out about the horror? So we need to know the whole story. And the next question becomes, aside from the whole story, how did this hurt you? You. And only you can answer that question. Suppose you were the mother. It would make you feel terrible. It would make you feel guilty. Why did I not see this? And when I first started to suspect, why didn't I do anything about it? So you are identifying how it has hurt you. And now you're trying to take care of the victim, but in some ways you are the victim too right now. All right, the third step in whatever the problem is, I'm going to make it a little bit easier. Suppose we change this to your best friend, number one, your best friend called and she was having a really bad day. Heavens, maybe she was in PMS, who knows? And she just let it loose. She said, "You are the worst mother I have ever known. And I'm tired of your rotten manners. And by the way, your clothes are awful. And I'm also tired of your support of Trump. I don't want to hear any more of all of that. Don't call me for a while." Wow. Okay, you can describe that phone call. Now, how would you name the hurt? What has it really done to you? Well, you know, we were all taught sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not true. That's not true. And in looking at when the psychologists look at the damage done to people by something like a terrible phone call like that, the damage in many ways is comparable to if she had kicked you, if she had slapped your face. The psychological damage is comparable to physical damage. So you can identify, it has undermined my self-confidence. It has totally shattered my image of myself. You can say it interferes with my relationship with other women and with my other children now because I don't trust myself. You have named the hurt. Now you've told the story, you've named the hurt. Are you ready to forgive? And now I'm going to take you back to how we defined forgiveness in the first class. Forgiveness is a decision not to retaliate. So you have decided that you're not going to say back to her, "You've got the ugliest clothes I ever saw, and man alive, if I hear any more from you about Biden, I'm going to get sick." And you've decided not to retaliate in whatever fashion the original harm was done. That's the forgiveness. And now the fourth step. You have to decide whether you're going to renew or release the relationship, and depending on the hurt, either can be appropriate. Suppose we're dealing with the awful example I started out with of the sexual molestation. I'm going to assume that there'll be a real question of whether you would ever want to resume a relationship between those two individuals. But if it's your best friend, you might very well want to resume that relationship. In neither case Are you erasing the blackboard? It can't be as if it never was. You are not erasing the blackboard. If you choose to renew the relationship, you're going to have to build. You're going to have to put some Band-Aids on. You're going to I can remember a psychologist saying one time, this is a terrible measurement, but for every awful word you say to your kids, you're going to have to do at least 10 really nice ones. Well, the process of renewing a relationship is going to have to accept the harm that was done. And it was done. You felt awful. And now whoever she was has to be able to say, I'm really sorry I said that. Now, there aren't any magic words here. We said before, there aren't magic words in the scripture either. You don't have to say, I'm so sorry, Sue. Please forgive me. It can be done in other ways. And it can use other words. In the confessional, in the Catholic Church, the priest says, ego te absolvo te. Or that's what he used to say. It means, I forgive you. I'm not sure that there are magic words in our service either, although Mother Marcella is going to say some beautiful ones after our confession today. And in our confession in the Eucharistic service, that absolution comes for us as a group in the same way it comes in the individual confessional. That is enormous. But with us, in church, as with human beings, you aren't exactly erasing the board. Because sin and these events that we've seen have consequences. And in the forgiveness that is part of our parables today, the consequences remain. He didn't say anything about what was done with the property that was sold. He didn't say we're going to evict that man who bought all those orchards and now they're mine again. No, there are some problems to dealing with that. So keeping in mind the 4 steps of forgiveness and the fact that forgiveness is not erasing the blackboard, it is your decision not to retaliate. Now, hopefully, you're going to decide to renew the relationship and build it again. And there's a wonderful saying in some of the fiction books that when you have a scar over a hurt, what is the saying? That becomes stronger than the rest of your body. A scar is where you'll be stronger. I don't know, it sounds mighty nice. It still means you've got to acknowledge the harm that was done and then build over it. Now I want us to talk about the older son. The older son. This is a Tissot painting again. And remember, Tissot put the whole thing into the 19th century in London. And now the prodigal son has come back. And remember, we've got kind of a seafaring business. So you see the ships in the background. And here the prodigal is in the arms of his father. The older son is here with his wife. He's standing there in the corner. He does not look that happy. He's thinking, oh my heavens, where do we go from here? And in the time that he's been away and spending all the money, I've been doing all the work. And I've been trying to figure out how to compensate for the assets that he took away and spent however he spent it. When we go back to the first painting that we started with, the Rembrandt. Now, I cut this a little bit to be able to get the full height of the older son on the right. Now, to be honest, we've got to give the older son his due.
Mhm.
And in many times, they kind of give the older son a bad time. The older son has been there the whole time. He's been working the place. He, in effect, has become the kind of person that the father would have him be. He looks like an upright man wearing the kind of clothing that the son of the patriarch would have him wear. He's got the wonderful beard. If you notice, by the way, on the prodigal son, his head has been shaved. And that would have been true if he had been charged with a crime or had spent any time in prison. This prodigal is really about kind of as bad as he could be being out of prison and then going home again. He is the opposite of the upright son. So what happens with the upright son? Now remember, we've now put wonderful clothing on the prodigal, and we've given him shoes, and we brought him back. He's got the ring, and he's had the fatted calf killed. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. I mean, this party was underway. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied. Notice the verb, he has come. He didn't say your brother repented. Your brother's come. "And your father has killed the fatted calf because he has called him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your order. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." It's fascinating. The footnote here.
Yeah.
We make this all in the passive voice because that's the way we kind of protect ourselves from making assumptions about God. But you know, in some of the Coptic religions, it's in the active voice. So the father says, "Your brother was dead and I raised him." That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
But in any event, it's fascinating. Now, for our purposes, it says, "Your brother was dead and is alive again." So where does that put us with the older son? Well, the criticisms about the older son are he's really resentful.
Sure.
And yeah,
I don't blame them.
she says, "I don't blame him. You wouldn't either. I've been right here." Now, the equivalent of what the father says to that, and I love this, if we go back and look at our 4 steps, telling the story. The older son has told the story. "I've been here all the time. And now this kid reappears, and our time has really been tough because I had to make up for the kid. And the kid reappears, and he gets the fattened calf. Did he name the herd? Yeah, I wanted a party too, and you didn't give me even a goat. Now, what does the father do? Because the father has been insulted, by the way. For an Oriental patriarch, maybe the prodigal son was bad, but the older shouldn't have talked to his father this way and called him out of the party, So in front of the father's guests, he gets up and goes outside to try to reason with the son. I almost feel that, by the way, what the father would have done had he not forgiven, he would have retaliated. Remember, the definition of forgiveness is you decide not to retaliate. The retaliation for the older son's behavior would have been, you go to the storage room of the house, I'll see you a week from today. You can't talk to me this way. And I will give you what's appropriate to give you when your mother and I decide what's appropriate. He didn't do that. The father went out and talked to him. This is a new model. I said earlier, many things that the father is doing that make him now our compassionate father. It's a new model. He has given the son what the son asked for. May have been a mistake. Have you ever said a prayer of gratitude to God for not giving you what you asked for? Yeah. Okay, in this case, he has gone out and in effect given forgiveness right there. Remember, forgiveness doesn't demand magic words. You can give forgiveness by your behavior. Now, are you going to renew or release the relationship? And either is all right, and neither erases the blackboard. Okay, what the father basically says to the son is, come into the party. Oh, and everything I have is yours. How many goats do you want? It's all yours. Everything I have is yours. We're going to keep the party going because your son is back. But what the father has done is to renew the relationship between the father and son. Come in with me. Now, it's a different question about what the older son is going to do vis-a-vis the younger son. Because interestingly, that's not quite focused on here. But that will involve a whole lot of rebuilding. And we've got to acknowledge and remember in ourselves that forgiveness is aside from trying to renew or fix or repair whatever was broken. My brothers one time, forgive the personal show, I've got a bunch of younger brothers. And when we were growing up, it was a time when what teenagers did to one another was, do you remember TPing houses? Yes, a few of us remember that, yes. They would take toilet paper around, and the toilet paper would decorate the trees just beautifully.
Halloween.
Yes. Okay, there was a boy who lived about a block away that they just found was a pain in the neck. And one night, somebody went up and really did a job on all the great big pine trees in the yard. Well, my mother had a strong suspicion. So my mother calls the brothers into the kitchen and says, okay now, did you do this to the Eustace's house? Why, you never saw such looks of innocence on young boys' faces. Oh my, why could you suspect this? Okay, so it was quiet and they were all very eager to get on with their tasks or their snacks or whatever. And my father was in the TV room. And my father called them all into the TV room and closed the door. And my father was a man of very low voice, and I couldn't hear a thing. All I know is that all of a sudden there was uproarious laughter. Okay, and in a few minutes, they all came out and they headed up the hill to the Eustace house. Whatever my father said to them, and I found out afterward that what he said, it was probably very manipulative. They had closed the door and he kept it silent for a couple minutes, and then he said, "Man, did you ever do a great job on the Eustace's trees?" And they laughed and they started talking about how they had done it and whatnot. "Okay," he said, "now you're gonna go out and clean it up." Okay, so they could go up and try to make it what it was before, so it's part of, to the extent you can fix it, you've gotta fix it. And then you can start to rebuild the relationship, because they were gonna keep going to school. And of course, next week, you can imagine what happened to the trees in our lot. So it's renewing or releasing the relationship, and either one can be appropriate depending on the circumstance. Here, they're gonna wanna renew it. And there's gonna have to be some real conversation that goes on about that. But the Father will be the key, his forgiveness of both of them will be the key to the threesome being able to get together again. Now, think back. By the way, I am sure, and I realize I can't prove this, I think the older son went into the party. And I think the older son, by the way, I'll bet there are a whole bunch of older sons in this room. The son equals child. So you women can be the older son. I'll bet we've got a whole bunch of older sons here. Older sons tend to be very responsible. Psychologists tell us that the firstborns often are leaders. Unfortunately, they also can be somewhat bossy. And our siblings will tell us so. But in any event, I think the older son went into the party. And he enjoyed the filet mignon or whatever they made out of that fatted calf. Now, this has been a parable, we said. This is a parable that started with the Pharisees saying, "You associate with sinners and tax collectors, and heavens to Betsy." Yeah, they were a particular category. It was bad. Is it true you associate? And what have we seen from these three stories? Well, the way I've been thinking about it, and you'll probably have equal or better or different suggestions, I think we've seen different categories of sin in the three stories. In the first one, the sheep kind of goes wandering, he goes meandering on his own, not paying any attention. So that you can get into sins of various kinds, almost meandering and not realizing what you're doing until you're part of the way there, or all the way there. And basically what we have is the good shepherd goes out, he hunts us down, God comes looking for us with grace. And he puts us on his shoulders, carries us. Now, suppose we think of the woman with the coin You know, when you lose things, it's an awful feeling. Have you ever lost your wallet? You can't even think straight. Oh, where was I when I lost this last, and how am I gonna replace my driver's license, and oh, I don't know what I'm gonna make for dinner, but until I find this thing, I'm not thinking straight. Well, the woman had lost this coin. I think the coin is a different kind of sin. It happens just virtually, immediately. And yeah, you really did it. Man, did you really do it, whatever it was. So the Lord helps whoever sweep the floor and you're back in the right place. It's a different kind of sin. Then we get to the prodigal son. And we have kinds of sin that are really awful, awful. Bishop Tutu said that he has two lessons for us about these sins. One is that no sin is unforgivable. And every person can be helped. Wow. Because what the prodigal has basically done is, for that time, he has kicked every horse in their barn. He's thrown out all the values of his family, and by the way, he's taken a huge piece of the family assets. So he's done everything he could, and in passing, because of the way he did it, in effect, he has said to his father, I sure wish you'd die. That's what the lesson was of, I want mine now. Can't wait for you to die. You aren't dying fast enough. That's different, by the way, in the other story of the man and the two sons. In that story, it really did occur right before Isaac's death, where Jacob and Esau did the switch. So where does that put us today? It leads us to looking at various kinds of sins. Now, we live in a different time. We can find much more imaginative ways to sin now than are portrayed in the Bible. But you know, the forgiveness process is the same. And we hope that we're ending up just like this, in the Father's arms. That's where we all want to be. If you have your program, in the back of the program, I think on page 7 in your program, you have the prayer attributed to St. Francis. I'd really like us to close this today with that prayer. And I hope our dear Pope Francis is recovering. Let's start out with the prayer together. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. I will see you at the celebration of the Eucharist.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You're
dear.
welcome.
Thank you.